Good morning, everybody. We'd like to call this meeting to order. This is technically our third meeting of our police CBA, which technically counts as our second due to the fact that the first one was just to get our bearings together, make sure that all of our contracts and the legalities of which we were going to carry this course of meetings through was accounted for. Having said that, if there are no questions to begin, we will start by handing the meeting over to Mr. Kerr.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to make sure that it's on the record that both parties acknowledge that our first meeting for the purposes of contract negotiations occurred on July the 6th of 2022. Since we are under statutory requirements to bargain under certain periods of time, we want to make sure we start the time clock at the exact right moment that we did begin negotiations. So that would be the only thing I'd like to, add to the conversation. With regards to the materials that I provided you, like I said, that's a good faith effort on my part just to do the math and arithmetic involved in trying to establish what the cost of a initiative would be. Obviously, your finance director and your HR personnel are going to be the experts, if you will, with regards to the actual costing. There's materials that were not available to me with regards to certain employees and their date of rank and or their date of hire in relationship to lateral entry that facilitated a circumstance where I couldn't give you an exact number because I didn't know when people would advance through the pay plan to different steps. So I tried to identify that both by email and in the actual spreadsheet itself. I suspect that the finance director is going to be the city's, I guess, point person, and her expertise will be the one that tells you and the council and the chief what the actual dollars and cents are. So.
Very good. Did you want to take a moment for us to go? First of all, yes, we do acknowledge, as mentioned, that technically this is our second meeting. I think Gus has no objections to that. Gus, could you confirm?
Yes, that is correct. I have no objections to that. That sounds good to me.
So meeting number 3, which is today, will technically become meeting number 2 for the sake of time. All agreed, then we can move that forward. Chief, do you agree?
I'm ready.
No, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yes, sir.
Mr. Kerr, you shared some information with us. Do you want to go over that next?
Sure. I didn't print it out, so I'm going to have to open it up on the
No, that's
computer.
fine.
Okay, to actually identify how I worked through the process. Formerly, the city, in our last contract negotiation over a year ago, had provided me information with regards to the pay steps and promotional grade for each of the members of the department at that time. Of course, we have advanced in time by years, so I had to freshen that information to try to get an idea. And then also, there's been new hires and things of that nature that had to be added to the calculation. And so the first step in my process was to establish as a real time, and you'll see dated July the 9th, as of that date, based on information provided with regards to personnel within the police department and what pay step that their rate of pay was. And using former spreadsheet provided by the city, I calculated a gross cost to the city for those employees of the police department. And it basically come out approximately to $2.6 million, which included, all your pension obligations and so on and so forth. And these are numbers that were provided by spreadsheet previously over a year ago. And then to that, as we had discussed in our first meeting with the city, where we laid out what the membership felt like was the best case scenario, we wanted to try to acquire a 3-year agreement with the city, and then we wanted to try to establish a compensation system that would be competitive with the area. And so we projected that to be a 5% across the board raise each of the 3 years. And that's all relative to all the budgetary process you folks have to go through, but that was going to be our recommendation, and that's what we asked you to discuss. And so for the first year of the contract, if we had a 3-year contract, we go in effect on 10/1 of 2022. So basically, it's a simple mathematical equation of adding 5% salary and extrapolating the cost. And so each of the color-coded years represents typically the budget going into effect for that year, 10/1/22, for the fiscal year 23 budget, and so forth across all 3 years. So if we get down to the cumulative costs, the differences and so forth, that's what I concern ourselves on, what it costs. So and like I said, this represents, there may or may not be pay step progression in reality with the employees involved in the costing. I will tell you, some are obvious that if you just promoted this year, 3 years today in the pipeline, you receive a step increase. But I'm, with the basis of information I have, if we take the finance director to actually extrapolate those numbers, because I don't have access to certain dates, if you will. And so we talk about what you're paying today, if you will, with regards to payroll, as opposed to how much additional funding would it take to award a 5% across the board raise, then it's our estimate that it would be $133,000 in the first year of contract, and then the second year would be $139,000 for a 5% across the board raise. And finally, the third year would be $146,000, almost $147,000 for the cumulative effects, all the compounding of the 5% across the board each year. And so the cumulative value of that 5% across the board raise over 3 years would be in the neighborhood of $420,000. And that's trying to take into account all payroll expenses to the city, which, like I said, I have to defer to your finance director, who's going to be in command of all those real-time numbers. I can only create the closest approximation I can mathematically. And so that was really the information that we lay it out for what we anticipate the cost will be for 5% across the board raises for each of a year in a 3-year contract. So
Just to reiterate though, sorry to cut you off, you are asking for 5% increase per year over the next 3 years.
correct. That was our initial.
Trying to get some information we could print out for all of us. I'm sorry for doing this here. I'm gonna ask Kyle to print it for us if he's able to.
And then also I'd like to point out that, as you will know, there's 5 vacancies with the authorized Springfield Police Department. So this in no way represents the total salary cost to the city for the police department, assuming you hire additional personnel. And so, like I said, yet again, we would have to yield to the finance director to give you the entirely accurate focus of what the police budgetary number would have to be on an annual basis for salary, because it certainly wouldn't be the numbers that I have on the spreadsheet.
currently 5 vacancies. I understand since our last meeting, we may be looking at more vacancies as some folks are being recruited to go elsewhere. So it's just part of what we do, right?
Well, so I can only tell you that I know that there's officers that you currently employ that are competing in other venues. And I can only make an assumption that it's for additional funds. I can't tell you why. But I will tell you that I am aware of it, but that's a constant living process that every police department goes through.
Certainly.
That's why we stress as an association to yourself, the mayor and the council members that it's always in the best interest of the city to ensure that you maintain a competitive salary. You know, that's going to be indicative of your ability to fund those programs, but there's never been a time in our business that I'm aware of in my 40 years that it is as competitive for hiring as it is today. The pool for officers is shrinking, and everyone in the municipal, state, and county business is competing for talent, and there's not as many people that choose law enforcement as a career. So it's really, really important, I think, to the citizens of Marque and the city council to ensure that you efficiently run a pay plan that entices people to come to work here and at the same time creates stability. But you know, a lot of people in the police business go make applications to other departments. That doesn't mean that they, can take their offer. You know, sometimes an employee has to, evaluate the pluses and minuses. Sometimes they decide it's better to stay where they are than go to a new venue because the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side of the slope, as you well know. So,
Oh, do I?
but that's pretty much where we are with regards to the costing aspect. One other aspect that we had discussed, and I apologize, but we couldn't get the information together in a timely fashion, but we were going to try to provide the city manager with 3 names of local psychological talent which we do have the names now, but we couldn't get it to you in time for the meeting. So
Certainly.
we'll certainly communicate that to you, but we couldn't get it done in a timely fashion for the date of the meeting that you had. So
Thank you, kindly, sir. It's all 3 years. Sir. Mr. Kerr, you still got the floor. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
I would, any questions you might have, I'd be more than happy to try to give you the information you need. But as far as what we presented to you, this pretty much sums it up as far as, providing you with whatever estimates we could.
All right, Chief, you ready?
Yes, sir. Okay,
Chief had mentioned he wanted a chance to, as representing not only the department, but also the city, he's got some things he'd like to inquire or ask.
what I'm talked it over with City Manager Caesar Garcia, and there's what I'm going to show you is it might sound radical, but I think it's something we need to look at. Not, I think, I know. with all these stipends and all that you're wanting, 75% of our budget of 5.6 million is salaries. And that's about national. Some are really higher. I mean, 80%, 85, maybe 90. But we got to get this under control. We're losing people. I just met Officer Williams from Texas City. He's already looking at stealing one of my warriors. We got others that have been requested to consider going. And we know that we're a training ground for other cities, especially Texas City, which pays $5 more an hour basically than we pay. And I know they have a different kind of budget system, but we have to stop becoming the training and recruiting ground for other cities when they get a couple of years. As you know, it's happened on my first run, it's happening now. And it's just something we're going to have to live with forever. And it happens all over the United States. Every city I've been, my city has been a training ground for some other city that does better. But when you got them really close, like we do, it's really hard. And I know Susie's going to pass out when I talk about this, and the city manager, not as much, but he knows. I'm going to pass this out, and it talks about raising the rates to pay to equal Texas City, basically. And I'm going to give you the 25 words or less summary. We're going to have to give up something. We're going to have to give up some stipends. But the bottom line is our officers will be paid about the same as Texas City. That's from the top to the bottom. Richard, you'd be facing a big ass raise. I'm telling you, a big raise, and others. But the thing is, it's got to happen. And I know Susie's going to pass out and be gobsmacked on this thing, but if we don't make an investment now, we're going to go on forever. Okay, so look at this and we'll talk about it. Got enough there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go over this real quick. The stats lately from IACP basically states we're not the Lone Ranger. Everybody's losing people. Recruiting's hard and so forth. We're lucky today. Yesterday, we had 13 show up to take the test. They all passed. And I think that's a lot to do with Stephen LaCroix and Corporal Harp. They're just the magnets and they got that charisma. So we went and said hello to them. But there's the stats. Okay. The second paragraph, I'm talking about Captain Kellerman. I did not know that he provides this service. Kyle, I was shocked. He provides us all kinds of stats. We were asking Maya, I call her the one and only, kiddingly, but she was getting these stats for me, and I don't know how she was doing it. I think she had somehow going to him, but he actually will come up with the stats that we need, the calls for service, everything we use for our crime rates. We're paying for it, and he provides it. I didn't know that. Kyle, you knew that, I guess, but in fact, we hired somebody to do, Caesar knows this, we hired a gentleman, Dr. Penn, to do a manpower analysis to tell us how many officers we should have. And well, he's working on it. He's almost finished. But I mentioned this to Captain Daryl Kellerman, and he said, "Oh, I do that." I said, "I didn't know that." So next thing I know, I got an email with, and the stats that he provided us are right here in the second paragraph. He's saying we need 27 on the patrol. That's patrol only. We have roughly 19 and 4 sergeants. What's that? 23. And I'm not counting Human and Dash. We have 19 actually working under the sergeant, and then we have 4 sergeants. So it looks like we're short about 3. Then he came up with the total officers we should have. And by the way, the one that's working on it, Dr. Penn, he's not going to tell us totally how many officers we should have. Daryl figured that out, and it's based on an equation. He's saying we should have 46 total, of which 27 should be strictly working on patrol, answering calls for service. Okay. Going down to about the 5th paragraph, we're talking about, we know this. We're having a hard time retaining officers. We do recruit qualified people, and then we become a training and recruiting ground. Okay. Okay, to offset the costs. You see the first one? We would eliminate the stipend for the SRT. They get overtime besides the $200. They get overtime. There's a savings of around $32K. The community policing, which they would still get the 300, but it'd be based on their visits. And we would keep a record of that. Go to the back, next page. The uniform allowance. By the way, Texas City's uniform allowance is paid annually. I think it's basically for like, I think the investigators get $850 in the whole year. And it's based on business casual gets a certain amount annually. If you have to wear a coat and tie, it's a little bit more. And their offices receive basically $50 monthly. So I would say go from 85 to 50. Give up the floating holiday. See when it would start. This recalculation of the time, we're trying to work on that. Lieutenant Price is on that committee. We need to reduce all this time that we're got backlog. We're paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 when somebody leaves. It's got to stop. And I think the city manager's come up. I know he's coming up with a plan that next year we might be working just 3 days a week, like League City did, and they finally brought it down. But anyway, that if you do the math on that, if we get a raise, your bank account grows, and that's really hurting us. So if you do the math there, you would divide, for instance, 500. If you had $5,000 worth, you would divide it by the new raise 30, and you'd have at that point you'd have 166 hours. That's a pretty good formula. Okay. What I'm asking, and I don't, of course, Caesar's going to make the final decision on this, and Susie helping him. We want you to caucus on this. And in that order, of course, if approved by you guys, it would go to the city manager, finance, and we got to figure out how much it would cost. I looked at it. It's looking like a couple $100,000 to get us there. But our pay would equal their pay. And it would be giving up the stipends. I know you in your request, you got a lot of stipends in there. You got a stipend for just about everything that you can be. $50 here, $50 there. They're getting a pay raise of 4%. And I just talked to them the other day. One of our officers was courted, as many have been courted lately. And they're going to hire 25 officers in the new year, or their fiscal year. Once again, they'd be looking for our people. So this is something to look at. I got Texas City's pay scale in the backside. I was told by, not what I was told. I'm thinking that this is something you guys would like. If and this would cut out all this stipends and all the other things, but you'd end up with a healthy paycheck. So I want you to consider that. Caesar hasn't seen this till now. I know everybody's probably shocked, but we've got to make an investment in our department. We're going to continue to do this. It's been going on since I know for the last 10 years. So I'd like you to consider that. I hope we can afford it. We'll be paying equal to the city right next to us. So any questions? I don't really expect any negotiations right now. I want you to caucus on it, away from this point, but this is my take on the whole issue. We got to fix it.
Well, I have a couple of questions, I guess, but I'd also, in the context of those watching, I think we need to frame this. And so, and I trust in you to say that you're trying to adopt a pay plan that's similar in nature to that of Texas City based on the numbers you see here.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we're looking for other efficiencies within the pay of, for lack of better terminology, we call drag up pay, or, auxiliary pay practices and so forth. I would point out that in the school of competitive salaries for police, not everyone gets paid some of these, additional bonuses.
Mhm.
It's typically it's an incentive
Right.
to incent your baseline officer to want to go out and obtain the training and be assigned to some of these, professional assignments. Or if, in the school of the chief's statutory ability and management rights, you can assign anyone in this police department at any function you choose.
Sure.
And so when you, as a chief, determine it's, and I'll just use the community-oriented policing effort, that's not necessarily the job that every hard charge patrol police officer wants to run out and do on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And so I can recall, you wanted to incentivize that assignment.
Mhm.
You wanted people to
Right.
actively, and the way you did that was with money. And
Right.
we concurred. And so it's not always about money, as you well know. Anybody that,
Right.
works with the data and establishes benchmarks for survey knows that in the increments of priorities, pay is not number one priority for anyone who seeks this job. So we clearly understand what you're trying to put forward. I think it's best said that as an organizational leadership, these guys have to really sit down and do some soul searching, because loyalty is not always a purchase commodity. It's
Mhm.
a product of being a member of a professional police department that makes you feel good about working for it. And as you well know from the study of, surveys done for police, pay is not the number one. Sometimes it's being involved in
Right.
decision making, being respected. There's
Exactly.
a litany of things that come in. So we certainly appreciate your perspective as chief.
Mhm.
We understand the limits the city is based on its funding, which is every city's problem, as you well know. So
Not,
we're certainly
not to this extent though, Mr. Kerr. I think,
well,
I think let's just be honest in that extent.
your
Budget
tax
trip.
rate is significantly different than other venues, so obviously
Right.
there is going to be a difference. So to me, that's a system of priorities that is supported by your citizens and your council members. And we live in that world. You as a city manager live in that world. We live in that world as employees of the city. So from that standpoint, we clearly understand what we're
Right.
talking about.
You see, like Texas City, they get $50 a month for SWAT team,
Right.
to be on the SWAT team. They don't have stipends like we have, all these stipends, but their pay is higher. So a guy leaving here, woman, it's $5 an hour more. That's $10,000 a year. That's what they're telling me. That's why they're going there. So that's what I'm trying to say is we got to stop all these there's got to be a trade-off, because we can't do
Yeah.
both. And that's what
Well-
I'm thinking, trying to get across.
We are definitely appreciative of your point of view with
Yeah.
regards to trying to put all the bucks
Right.
in the most efficient way that you can to incent people to come to work here and also
Right.
stay.
Right.
We, since every person doesn't get all
Right.
of these different stipend pays per se, we can certainly appreciate the fact that, from your point of view as the chief of police,
Right.
it might make more sense to see that everyone gets a little bit more than
Right.
creating, a level of specialization. But we'll agree in the concept of, putting that carrot out front. Sometimes the chief has to incent people
Right.
to take an assignment that nobody wants to do, or else you're left with only those folks who volunteer will be
Right.
the people who may not be best suited for the assignment.
Right.
And so we certainly hear where you're coming from.
And
I think
I
all
don't,
this is statistically based.
like I'm saying, John, I don't want you to make a decision now, because
Yeah.
we could talk on this 8 hours and not get anywhere.
Oh,
I just wanted you to talk about it maybe behind the scenes and come back and then we'll really, because I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna tell you guys this now.
well,
I've been the city manager. I getting calls last night till 9:00. They're cutting us pretty darn much, and they're cutting things that I really didn't expect. So it's bare bones. We're scraping the barrel, and I trying to get you guys get my guys, you guys, you're all my words, to something that we can afford. So we can talk forever on money, but I want to tell you guys this. We're at the bottom of the barrel. We just lost it. We had a big rollback, you know that. We are scraping, and I think this is a solution. I know Susie, she's probably getting ammonia spirits now, passed out. But the thing is, we got to do something, and we can keep nickel and diming this thing forever. So think about it. We'll talk about it after another time. This is meeting number 2. I changed it from 3 to 2, and then we'll, you know, we'll negotiate. Really, that's what I'm trying to do. So I am losing things that I never thought I'd lose. And I got called last night, and the manager, I just, you know, shut down because I know what he's talking about. Okay. Okay.
Well, my suggestion would be that we get everything on the table that, you know, from your perspective with regards to, you know, what you're trying to lay out.
Right.
As far as dollars and cents, and then let us take a caucus where I can.
There you go.
Talk with the members of the team. As you said, there may not be, you know, we're captive of the membership point of view. And so, you know, if the entire membership is watching this right now, you call them on the phone and
Right.
get some input. But the problem is that it doesn't work that way. So, you know,
Overall, more people are positively affected. Richard doesn't want to be on the SRT, Sergeant Garcia, but he's going to get a big raise.
right.
And same with the others. Josh is getting the 200 for being on the SRT, but he's getting also a raise. So, you know, Pete puts this all together in your mind, and we'll come back. Okay.
Right. Well, I mean,
And if I may, I don't think taking away of the incentives is a permanent solution. I
Right.
think it's based on the fact that what we're doing now, it's almost temporarily freezing these until we're able to move forward the way we need to.
You know, and
And I think that's what you're proposing.
yeah,
right?
and what I'm saying is, like community policing, our crime rate's going down, and it's going down because of that. You don't have a citizen in the city, and you know this, John. I know people don't like working it maybe, but you don't have a citizen in the cities telling me to stop doing that.
right.
They want more of it.
Right.
And I just told Caesar last night, we just gotta, anyway, I can't even talk about it. We got an opportunity to be an award for stuff we're doing. That's all I'll say.
The culture is being changed. And I think it's something that we're a long ways where we need to be. But nonetheless, we are moving in the right direction.
Right.
And I think together, we wouldn't be here at this table if we all didn't care. So I think that's beyond that. I think we're trying to figure out how to get to your request or as close to it as possible, with hopefully without losing so much more. I'll go ahead and just tell you, this is just from conversations on our budget and so forth before. And I'll just be blunt about this. In my 4-month synopsis of being here, if this city were a business, we should have closed down about 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. Understand that from the financial perspective, looking back at some of the records, if we were a business, this city were a business, which technically it is, if you don't think of it like that, technically business, we should have closed 5 or 6 years ago because of your revenue numbers through property tax and sales tax in comparison to your expenses. Although, yes, there's been an increase in property tax revenue and so forth, there's been an increase in sales tax revenue, but it has not gone in line with what your needs have been, both for salary, right, benefits and so on and so forth, which is why we're in the situation we're in now. Having said that, we're at a point now where we're at that breaking point. We need to make a decision as to how we're going to move forward. And to do so, there's just a lot of challenges occurring at one time. That's what I can tell you from the seat that I'm in, not only as a city manager, but also in this perspective from this meeting as your moderator. That's just something I want you guys to understand from that perspective. Having said that, as I'm taking notes here, I've got your ask is essentially 5% a year for the next 3 years, plus a few of those stipend increases that were listed. And the chief has now essentially countered based on his budget constraints. And even though he doesn't know if he can fit these in, but he's countered with 4% per year for the next 3 years, I'm assuming, right?
Well, you're talking about based on this,
Right.
this doesn't talk about a percentage, just talk about new salary rates totally.
Right, but I thought you mentioned,
Well, we're talking
We're
about,
gonna have a multi-year contract. I think
Yeah.
the manager trying to point out that
I'm
we
adding
gotta
what,
keep up with the Joneses.
yeah.
I was just saying what
It
Texas
says-
City's doing.
It says on page 2, that right now, before October 1st, when Texas City is going to receive an additional 4% raise.
Yeah, I was just
So
talking about.
you wanted to go kind of in line with that.
Yeah, and using the pay scale that's attached, that's where we should go.
Okay,
And
so-
there's some ranks, they have captains, we don't have captains, stuff like that. They don't have corporals, we have corporals. We'd have to work that out, John,
Yes, sir.
it'd have to be worked out. But that's what I'm saying. I'm basically saying, I would like us to go to their pay scale. And they don't have ranks that we do and vice versa, but we could work it out. Okay. Richard Sergeant Garcia's salary would go to whatever it is, and it's pretty high, much more than he's gotten now. I keep
Well-
using Sergeant Garcia, but that's,
And again, also, as Chief mentioned, not getting this until right now, internally, our finance director would need to see this, review this as well and see what that looks like.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me, if my percentages are off, you've made a request of 5% per year over the next 3 years to be revisited in 3 years, correct? And it seems to me like depending on the math of what Chief is looking at, he's countering with what looks like what may be lower. If we go with this matching their, forget what their total number would be, but if we match what Texas City is doing, where they're trying to do 4% for 3 years, then we would try to match their increase that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, and let me say that, when we put all these numbers together for you, it's based on the philosophy that we find throughout the police market, that we study the numbers and we try to determine that point of competitiveness to maintain. And so everything that we presented to the city really represents what other police venues are doing, and or it's our best guess, if you will, how you remain competitive and keep up your hiring process and typically attract people. And you do that by competing in the dollars and cents market. Now, we appreciate what the chief's putting forth. I think that it's not as radical as you would want to, Now, it may be radical to people at the table right now, but if you don't study this on a day-to-day basis, I mean, it's not uncommon for cities to have a very professional paid
right.
plan and put all their eggs in that basket. And so you compete for assignments based on desires. And in some cases, when the pay is good across the board with all the employees, there is a competitive spirit to go and want to be on the SRT. So, but if you're, thinking about, your base pay only, and which this shouldn't be a factor in the municipal government business, but it is. If your pay is such that you have to go out and work additional employment, to try to get that money into your household to make you meet, that's what you do. And so, the better you get paid at your first job, if you will, is probably the number one priority with regards to the other things that you put into the context of why you work. So we certainly appreciate the fact that the chief is kind of just cut through the chase and said, here's the way I see it. And we're not going to, fall and say that's wrong, because it is a standard approach. Just like what we've been trying to do is a comparative analysis of the pay market, if you will, around. And there's some cities that have pays that we didn't study. There's not enough of them that have it. It doesn't make it a benchmark. And so we're trying to join with the city to give you as much fact-based information to support why we think what we do. It's not just about money. It's about what's in the best interest of the citizens' taxpayer dollars that go to support this program. It's all about taxpayers, or it's not. So we certainly appreciate that, but and we want to give this its due by really doing the analysis.
Yeah. And John, I mean, if you all agree, we got to check our stats.
Yes, sir.
And it might not be possible, but I hope it is. And if it is possible, we could work some out maybe. But if it isn't, we're going to go right back to the other nickel dime stuff, you know what I'm saying? And I hope it doesn't work that way, because we got to stop. No matter what, all these stipends and all, I still losing officers who are getting $25 an hour or 26, and they're going over there for 32. That hurts, you know. And it's always the same caliber for 4 or 5 year officers, you know. But it still helps the bigger ones like Sergeant Garcia and Dash Cantu and lieutenants, you know.
Well, I mean, it's abundantly clear that some of the venues around here, I mean, since we negotiate on your behalf as well, I can tell you exactly what's going to happen there. Everyone's facing the same dilemma.
Right.
And you know, when you look at some of the venues around here, they have the same challenging problem that you do. They're even smaller. But they're enacting $5 an hour rate because they want to be competitive. They want to bring officers into their city, and then they hope that they can maintain them by showing them that sense of loyalty. So what we know is working people on this side of the table. If this department was properly staffed, life would be so much better for your average officer.
And that's something that I think collectively, that is being mentioned, we're working on.
Right.
You know, it's hard to keep the positions filled when it's a revolving door. So it's like, you know, it's like the dog trying to chase its tail, if you will. You fill the positions, but you don't pay enough. So as a result, they're going to come get trained and then leave. And then they're going to leave for different reasons. Like, you know, their new position might be closer to their home that they want to move into. Or they might be close to certain venues or activities that they like to do when they're not at work. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that could drive why somebody would want to leave. As you mentioned, it's not always about money. But having said that, I think that's a scenario we're in, right? We're behind. Like right now, we're proposing a 4% increase to match what other cities are going to probably are proposing to do over the next few years. However, we're already behind them by X amount of dollars to begin with. So what should happen is probably a 10% increase across the board for us to be competitive and catch up, but we're not with the wherewithal to do that. And I think everybody understands that situation. What we're trying to do is get to what we could do. Now, my question is to counter that, or to ask the question is in the situation you're in, would you be objective to a scaled increase approach? So for example, let's say you're saying 5% of what your request is, right? Would you be objective to 4, 5, 6, meaning that still over the next 3 years, you still get to the same 15%?
Yeah.
Or in Chief's case, where he's presenting, I'm assuming going by the just basic conversation, you're going by 4%. Would you be objective to 3, 4, 5 to where you get it on the back end? The reason why I'm saying is we know that SB2, I mean, we might be facing another rollback here. We may be facing another rollback. Let's just call it what it is. And, you know, Chief made a very good point. And Susie, I know that you're on the call. We spent a lot of hours and a lot of time going over these budgets. And at the end of it,
Yes, sir.
regardless of what we end up adding, right, we have to cut from somewhere. Whether it's from another account or another department, or we have to cut. The pie's not getting bigger. So we're making those conscious decisions, and we're cutting in every capacity we can. You guys heard me from the ICE the other day. I gave back my rollback check. I'm asking others if they want to do so and are inclined to do so, to also do so. I mean, it's a small drop in the bucket in comparison to what we need, but I think we're all showing that we want to try to make this work in some capacity. So having said that, I have a couple of questions to ask specific to output, because now we're going to talk about revenue, something that is never really talked about in the police department, right? Never talked about because you're not here to produce money, right? But there are certain things that allow you to offset those expenses. No different than, for example, the building department. Well, they could always charge more for permits, or they could do more inspections, or whatever the case is, right? In your case, the only thing that you guys do that is in any which way, shape, revenue neutral, that allows you to come as close as revenue neutral, would be your citations or anything that you give out. Now for warnings, there's no fee, correct?
That is correct,
But for citations, there's usually some fee depending on what the offense is.
depending on what the court is assigned.
Right. So I know you guys don't control that, but obviously the number of stops and citations issued is what reflects that. And I will say the numbers that I have in front of me, which I could share, these are things that Chief just provided, is something that the resident may turn around on the other side and say differently. If you want, I'll share these with you guys right now. All I did was a brief synopsis of it, and I'll just, for the sake of that, this is a record of citation offense count by official by stop result, which honestly is just, I'm not looking at the individual numbers. The only reason why I counted the people was because I wanted to see how many officers we had at the time in comparison to how many citations were issued. Even though in some of these reports, it'll say the same person with different badge numbers. So I don't know what that means and the reason for that, but if you don't mind, if I can share that with you guys. So basically, I know that these are in the heart of COVID and they're labeled by year. That's why I had them staggered side by side earlier. And we can share these with you because Chief just got those as well to us very late yesterday. Having said that, if you notice what the numbers are by citations, I'm not even looking at warnings. I'm not even looking at the total because at this point, one could argue that the total matters because those are stops that you're making and you're giving folks a warning, which is great in these tough economic times. I'm sure folks appreciate that. Even though these are COVID numbers and during COVID time, the impression is that during COVID, more stops were being made when it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, that you guys were not doing as many stops during COVID. Could you clarify that as to why there may be discrepancy in numbers? And this is for the public's.
I didn't see it. You're saying our numbers are lower during COVID?
No, the
They're
numbers are
higher.
actually higher during COVID, which is why I don't understand, were you guys told to maybe ease up on stops during COVID for obvious reasons?
Well, there could be several reasons on there, because the number of stops that we make is also determined on how many people we have in training. Obviously, you have more people in training, you're gonna have more traffic stops because they have to get more traffic stops with more experience. So we did have several people in training those years. So that could incorporate part of the numbers on there.
To why they were higher?
Correct.
Okay,
So we did scale back our traffic offenses during the COVID pandemic, but obviously we still have to train people. So that could be a reason why there are other higher numbers on there. Just looking at that list, there's several folks in there that were on training at the time. As far as citation numbers, around the same time, our chief of police had told us you'd rather us give warnings than citations. So,
and that was during the height of COVID.
well, yeah, before, during, and after, around about that time. He had mentioned that he'd rather us give warnings than citations.
And
so
that's
gonna affect
completely
our-
understandable.
Yeah.
And again, not questioning leadership at all, just asking because we know this will be a compare. I mean, these are your actual performance indicators here, right? This is how you're be tracked and judged by what you do and don't do. So that's why I asked that question. There had to be determining factors that would have caused that to be different, which makes sense. However, it's still staggering that during that time, in comparison to now, in some of those cases, you had less people than you have now. You were partially shut down for COVID. You were told to give more warning citations. And yet still, those numbers are higher than your current pace numbers.
Well, so they can't tell us whether to write warnings or citations. They can tell us that if we do a traffic stop, then we have to write at least a verbal warning or a
Certainly.
citation. There's several reasons for that, but as far as on there, again, if you're training, they have to train people one way or the other. And this is just off the cuff. I mean, we're
Sure.
on this thing a couple minutes.
No,
But
please. I just got it
looking at
right before
the
you guys did.
sheet, that's probably where some of the numbers are gonna be from. The newer folks are obviously gonna have more citations or more stops because they have to be trained.
Well, and let's be totally honest here, proactive police work, when you're talking about during COVID time, a lot of people are shut in, so if someone's moving around, sometimes it's not necessarily a good thing. And so one of the standard policing techniques, when you talk about routine patrol, is to make lawfully sufficient legal stops of people just to determine what their business is. That's, if they violated the law, then the officer has the discretion to decide whether they're going to give them a warning or a citation or not. I know the city and the chief are not in any way trying to illustrate that they think everybody should go out and do so many widgets a day.
No, that's
What
not
we're
in any
looking
way.
at is you want to analyze these numbers for the end product. The end product is efficiency. But, when you talk about good police work, a lot of that has to do with identifying people's need to be in an area and why and what they're up to. In every police academy I went to, and I've been to 3 in my police career, that was the cornerstone of good preventive patrol, is to go out into the community and lawfully stop people. And then you have the discretion. I've never been mandated to write a ticket in any venue I've ever. I've always had that discretionary power. And so, that's what helps drive the crime down. That's what helps, keep these citizens safe. And so, the training is one aspect of it, but the reality, I mean, we're talking about on any given day, an officer who's out there trying to do their job and has the time that are not running call to call. And they initiate self-initiated traffic stop. Many of the time it's to further their enforcement effort.
Certainly.
With regards
And-
to other crimes other than, traffic violations.
And this is also understandable because as you mentioned, calls and call volume, understanding an increase in call volume as well. And nature of call, right, would dictate that.
That's right.
Clearly, as folks were home for COVID, you probably got more calls for home-based, assistance, and you probably would have traffic with other people on the road.
And a lot of those we try to do over the phone as well.
Certainly.
So as opposed to showing people's houses, we're answering a lot of calls with the phone.
And I can't imagine what your profession was like during that time. I just know that in the abundance of data, I want to be able to support the reasoning behind it. To say, well, yes, citations were down because it was one COVID, but they're also down more because there's less crime being committed. People are driving more lawfully. There's less reason to pull people over. Whatever the reason is, I just want to be able.
Well, some of the lower numbers that are more recent, even after COVID, is our lack of support by staff, our command staff at the time. And why would I pull somebody over and risk getting on YouTube and getting a protest, chanting my name for my head, when I can just drive around, answer my calls for service, make sure my shit's functioning the way it should? I mean, I'm not gonna pull somebody over if it's gonna cost me my job.
There was,
Have somebody,
I think with Sergeant Garcia's talking about, Caesar, I wasn't here. There was a case that turned out to be pretty politically involved on a stop, and it shut everybody down for quite a while.
There were several cases of.
Yeah.
The morale was just, to say it was in the toilet is a hard being kind.
They were worried about what the sergeant said.
So paint me a picture of that. When was that? What was the timeline of when that, give me a window of time when that was the lowest?
20 or 19.
When morale was the lowest.
It's probably been last
Or, okay,
probably been about 5%.
I mean,
it wasn't a snap thing. It was
a
a
gradual.
gradual decline where we had a major incident and it just fell off the shelf. Nobody was pulling anybody over unless you were on train.
A stop was conducted.
And that, has that trend continued? Is it like that currently? Is it changing?
I would
Um,
say it's in the process of changing.
Okay.
And, a lot of that, also comes back to the fact that a lot of these younger officers that are here were actually trained during the time of COVID when, they were trying to meet the requirements for their training. And we were trying to get them their stops so that they could have that. But, that's what their goal was to complete the requirements and stuff for training. It wasn't centered towards, going out there and being as productive as we normally would be.
I'll brief you on that later, Caesar, but it was pretty majestic and it went on. The feelings, what I was told and pretty clear, was for about 3 years until the administration changed in July of 21. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned this to Susie, and I didn't know Caesar was going to talk about traffic, but we had a traffic section. You do remember that. And we had Jesse Gooseman did that for a while. And he's one of the only officers I've ever known that got accolades for writing a traffic ticket. And he was good at it. Of course, he went to Kima and came back. I told Susie, the finance director, that we were going to eventually start a traffic section. We need to do that because with the calls for calls, we all know this, it's cops. You just can't stay on it when you get a call. You might be 4 hours working a case. When we do get, hopefully, if we get the 6 officers on community policing, they're going to be 3 officer teams. One of their missions might be for 1 day a week at least, or maybe 2 would be traffic. They'll be the traffic team besides doing hotspots, deep directed patrol lights. So we're going to have that team back of, working traffic. So those numbers will be changed, will transition and be different. So that's Caesar, that's going to happen. That will happen. That SRT, whoever's on it might work hotspots, drug hotspots, crime hotspots. And their mission for one day a week might be nothing but traffic enforcement and doing a good job at it. So I just want to tell you that. That's why I'm glad to get 2 3-man teams to do that. They're not going to answer calls for service unless there's an emergency. That's not going to happen. Unless there's an emergency, a Mayday, they're going to work directed patrol. Okay.
And also on that note, obviously, as I never looked at these individually because the individual number is not what we're talking about, it's a total. But then I'm looking at this, and if it shows a variance in the individual's numbers having gone down, I'm assuming it would also relate to the fact that maybe the person is taking a different role within the department. Maybe they switch from days to nights. Maybe they're now in a different position or tied to a certain team or something. So obviously, those would be the reasons for that, right?
It could be.
One of the reasons on there, because just going off of just these base numbers, it's hard to give an accurate representation of anything. Because let's say someone's doing less traffic stops, but they're more quality traffic stops. I'm doing a traffic stop. I'm not just writing a citation. I arrest someone for a felony. Then, that's going to wrap them up for longer than this and just a traffic stop. So, I mean, just going off just numbers, I mean, there's a multitude of reasons why there could be some inconsistencies in there.
I just got one question. Where did we get those exact traffic stop numbers from?
It came from municipal court, Rosemary Bell.
Okay.
We asked,
So,
based on
The
Brazos.
the one thing I want to explain is those numbers could be skewed. Because if an officer makes a traffic stop and he doesn't issue a written warning or a citation, there is no Brazos entry. It doesn't exist.
Well, those are written
So-
warnings.
Yeah, I'm only going by what's.
Yeah.
Right,
I'm
but
not
what
including-
I'm saying
My
is
assumption would be that every officer documents their stop, it's statutory. so-
Well,
we-
right, so
So
let-
go ahead,
let-
because I think
just-
that's an important point you're
Yeah,
making. You're
let-
saying that
yeah,
sometimes you
hold
have
on.
stop folks that don't give either.
Well,
I just
yeah,
don't
let
want
me explain that real quick. Okay, so we use a CAD system. When we make a traffic
Right.
stop, we check out in our CAD system
Right.
on a traffic stop. If we were to clear that with a verbal warning, not a written warning, but a verbal, okay, then that person's not going to have an entry on Brazos. It's not going to show
No.
in Brazos because there wasn't an actual citation written.
Correct.
So your numbers, while they're there, the numbers only represent written citations or
Correct.
written warnings, not verbal warnings that may have been given at those time periods.
But
Sometimes the
that's-
disposition code is an arrest and no citation,
Yeah.
and no warning, because, you really have to screen through, but
that's changing.
personally, I'm a believer of the statistical analysis to, for the chief to understand the best management tactics to arrive within the police department. But when you're talking about a department that is understaffed, it's very difficult to
Right.
use any kind of a context of traffic stops in a measurable way.
Right.
Unless you have all the details that go with it,
Right.
because if an officer has, 8 hours of non-committed time because they had no call of the citation, I would have a problem if I was there, because their job is to go out and do the job.
So wait a minute,
Part of that
could you
traffic-
say that again? If you had, say that one more time?
I mean, if a police officer just got in the car and drove around all day long and did nothing, the chief is going to want to have a discussion with that officer.
Right.
That's why we study the statistics. We want to know, but we don't, this is not a factory. You can't predetermine the number of widgets that have to be manufactured on this assembly line every day. Sometimes it's a product. So in the school of police management, the chief may issue out some instructions. I'd like to see more contact, more citizen contact.
Right.
That's not necessarily saying go and write tickets. It's saying, I want you to stop people for violations and make that contact, find out what's going on.
Right.
To be proactive. And if you're just sitting in the parking lot, reading the paper, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all
And-
agree.
and we-
That's,
on-
these are all supervisors for the most part.
Yeah, no,
Supervisors.
but I
Yeah.
think what you made was a great point.
Right.
I think that was an important point. to make.
Statistical analysis is a key issue for efficiencies in any
Right.
governmental operation, especially in the police.
What we're
I think
doing,
a lot of the subject matter here, and I'm gonna be really,
right,
forthcoming, saying that these are guys that do the job
Right.
day in and day out. Here's a guy that manages the job day in and day out. And here's a man who
Right.
wants to know as much as he
Right.
can possibly know about efficiency. I think that it doesn't have to be done at a bargaining meeting. It can be done at
Mhm.
an ad hoc meeting in and on an ongoing basis to get the people who do the work to give you advice about what they have to contend with and how
Mhm.
better to do the job.
What-
And the chief can give input to the city manager about how to be more efficient in any given moment of time. But the reality here is if everybody's pulling in the same direction, you want that crime reduction, you want this city to be a much safer city. But we would argue that full staffing creates a much better work environment for those that are here. It gives them the capability to have preventive control time, have the initiative to go out and self-initiate, to do things that they've been trained to go out and observe and find and help make the citizens safer in the city. And, this is this is not something coming from these guys. I'm just telling you, my observation is that many of our bargaining locals and meet for locals, we put into the matrix of the contract a monthly or a quarterly labor relations meeting where the chief meets with representatives from the association to talk about these types of problems and how to fix them.
Right.
Getting input from all sides. I'm not saying that's the key in this case, but I think engaging all the players of this police department to be steward of progress
Right.
and implementation of valid crime strategies, suppression issues, and everything else is a solid approach to improving policing in the city.
What I want to mention.
Encourage you to do that.
Good points, John. What Corporal King mentioned, you all got the email from Lieutenant Price because we talked about it. To keep us from, we have to track for racial profiling stops every year. That's very important. We have put a cease to writing, to issuing verbal warnings unless there's an emergency, and it says that in an email. If Josh, you stop a car and you get a call to go, you got to leave. Sorry, ma'am, I've got a call to go on. You need to slow it down. But generally, no verbal warnings. That's ended. That's ended in the LMPD. It's going to be a written warning or a citation. No more verbal warnings unless you got an emergency to go to. And I'm going to stick to that because I've got complaints on people stopping women and people saying, you stopped my wife because she's this and this. Why didn't you give her something in writing? I want that to be in writing. That's my rule. And that's going to stay. I'm going to support that. We need to track racial profiling every year. And you can't do that by giving verbal warnings. It just doesn't happen. Brazos is where we use. That's our database. So written warning or citation, that's what it's got to be. Now, I know you stop people, you're looking for bad guys, and that's different. That's different. That has to happen. So I want to be clear on that. And the other thing is, we're going to have a team that does this in traffic, and it's going to happen with the neighborhood safety teams that we get on grant. We're going to be doing traffic specifically on that on certain nights, and those numbers are going to change. Okay.
I think we've got, just to go back on the notes, if you will. We acknowledged the first meeting. You said your request is 5% per year for the next 3 years. Chief essentially has countered with an unknown percentage, but assuming it is in relations to whatever that percentage is. I asked, and the way of doing that would be by removing some or all of the stipends that are, shown on your current pay plan. The question that I asked was if you would consider a scale, and whatever the final ask is would you consider that to be a scale? And then the last bit of discussion we talked about was a citation comparison, and that kind of summarizes where we are to this point. What else would you like to discuss at this time?
The one issue that we've discussed and we haven't kind of come to conclusion on still rests with the psychological well-being of the officers who work on the street and having access to adequate counseling services from police psychology professionals that are acknowledged. So that's the one issue that still lays on the table that we'd like to work with the city and the chief on to arrive at something that may be included in the contract. And maybe time is not on our side, and what we include in the contract is an agreement that we'll have a
Something
ad
come
hoc
up.
committee that will work on that, detailed by that, because I don't think the city is against that notion that it's best to improve if we can. But I just don't know that we have the subject matter experts to bring, to bear what we got to have to be successful in that area, which I know the chief and his troops, and maybe with the assistance of HR because of their expertise with health benefits and so forth, maybe they can arrive at the study of how best to, mentor officers with this counseling services. Maybe it's something that can be done within the healthcare plan. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's occupational in nature and has to be done through the workers' comp aspect of it.
You said you have a list now that you weren't able to provide just now. Looks like we lost power there, Kyle. Oh, okay.
So,
You said you have a list that you can share with chief for him to do his diligence on that sense.
sure.
If you could share that list with chief. There we go.
You know the story on what happened on this social worker and all that, John?
Yeah.
Okay, it got to be like an obstacle course. When I came aboard, I was advised that it was in the budget, a social worker. And the social worker, what I was advised, was going to be in this current year's budget, FY 21-22. It was supposed to be helping the community. That's what I was told. And it was going to be a full-time person. Then we got with Susie and the councilwoman McCullough, and it turned out, and Susie remembered that it was not an employee, not a full-time. It's going to be like a contract, and because the pay was not enough, it was maybe $60K, and that wouldn't be. And then we got caucusing on before Caesar arrived, and it turned out that this thing evolved to be somebody that would be mainly doing both, helping the officers and the community.
Right.
So then, and then it would work for the city manager. That changed the whole complexion of the whole thing. So I was totally surprised. And Caesar came aboard, and I think Caesar agrees, and my staff agreed, that you really need two. You need somebody, if you do this route, one to work with, help the community, a citizen that would give them advice, stuff the officers, go beyond the officers thing. And then maybe another one to help the officers, with the psychological issues. So I don't know, maybe we could get Caesar, maybe we get somebody through HR to be, at least help the officers. But we have an
Well,
employee
I
assistance
think
program, right?
if I look at my notes correctly, from what we discussed, you mentioned that you prefer that it was not somebody in-house. Prefer it was an outside service, which is
Okay,
why we
that is
drive to the
correct.
point of you giving us a list of folks that we would look to see. A, do they accept our insurance? If not, what could we come to terms with? And we could have an ad hoc committee for that. So in my sense, as you said, for the sake of time, if we could assure that we're going to include that as a part of the actual contract, with the understanding that we would still need to carry on those meetings to take place to not stop this from happening. I know we have a certain amount of time we have to get these meetings done in. So if you would agree to that, I see no reason why not. I don't think anybody's disputing the need for it. And not just for you, it would also be for fire personnel as well, should they need it.
Right.
Obviously under two separate umbrellas, but nonetheless, providing those services for all of our first responders would be what we would look to do.
But that's just for first responders, and not to help the community now,
That
right?
would be correct. This is
Okay.
totally separate.
Okay.
I think it was lost in the first run at this, that it would be multiple hats. That would be more if it was somebody in-house.
Okay,
But clearly what folks get confused is psychological services with a social worker slash caseworker slash community outreach are two totally separate things. And I think due to the sensitivity of it, I can concur that what your request should be done separate. And I think putting that just knowing that we're probably not going to get it resolved in time for finalizing this contract, but putting some language in there. And Gus, I know you're probably listening. If we could put some language in there that says that convening this meat and potatoes of the negotiation, the add-on would be that within X amount of time, we hope to have ad hoc meetings to then hopefully select somebody, or whether it means putting an RFP or whatever we're gonna have to do, what the services are that we're requesting so we can get that done. And if everybody agrees with that, because what we're talking, I don't want to delay the pay situation on that, but in turn, not have it, include the language in there that would hold our hands to the fire, if you will, our feet to the fire while we got this stuff done.
So basically what I was envisioning is we could put something in the contract, creating a committee. And the committee consisting of, at least 3 members of the association, and then letting y'all as a city pick 3 members that you would like to be on that committee. That committee can then move forward with meetings and come up with the answers that we're looking for, and what kind of a program would be appropriate for the city and for us, and then be able to bring that back to the table later to the city. And that way we can make a decision on that aspect at a later time. We can write it in the contract so that it allows us to do that. I agree, that's exactly what I want, because I don't want it to hold up our negotiations in reference to the contract, because it is going to take time. It's not something that we're going to come up with an answer in 2 weeks. It's got to, if we're going to do it right, we need to do it right. And it's going to take time to do that, especially if we're considering writing a 3-year contract, so I don't want something on the table waiting for 3 years.
So, and I think one of the notes I'm making is that the ask that we did not discuss now, for it to be psychological service, access to psychological service, and I'm going to put outsourced, right? Because obviously we don't want it to be internal. We want to make sure we clearly delineate that, that you guys will provide chief with that list, and that we want to add some language in the contract to be included at a later date. But I'm also going to put on here time specific with some form of ad hoc committee. You guys agree on that?
What do you mean by time specific?
Meaning, as you mentioned, we're not going to wait 3 years to do this. We're going to say, once we all meet together and see the size of what we're about to chew on, we say, okay, we're going to make this, we're going to make a decision on this in 3 months, whatever. I'm just throwing that out there. And then we're going to release an RFP, and we're going to go do this the right way.
Well, what I was actually meaning is if we don't write it in the contract where we can come back to the table and discuss that item, then we are stuck waiting 3 years if we do a 3-year contract. And that's what I wanted to avoid. So that's what I mean is, I
say include the language.
I want the language so we can come back to the table and we can, once the committee has kind of come up with a plan that's going to be, acceptable for all the members, and is going to provide them the best amount of care that we can possibly provide them.
I think having that list that you have shared with Chief Aragon, so he can get the ball rolling on his end, would be helpful. Also, Gus, do you object to having some language along those lines?
About the committee and sorry, you cut out for a minute. The committee and the psychologist?
Yeah, so the idea would be if we could add this similar language. I'm not going to talk in legal terms because I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but the addition of psychological service or access thereto being in the form of outsourced services that Mr. Kerr will provide, or anybody from your delegation will provide that said list to Chief Aragon. Want to include some type of language in this contract that says, add language in contract to include at a later date, but make it time specific, that we will host our first ad hoc meeting on this subject in X amount of time, and we're going to have 2 representatives from each side, whatever that may be.
We can do that.
Is that fair? Does that fall along the lines of what you're asking?
Yeah, I think if we go with 3 from each side, I think that gives us a good balance, because that'll allow you to have your HR representative. It'll allow you to have, if the chief or any designee that he wishes to have on that committee. So it'll provide y'all a little bit more room to have more input from different divisions, since it's not something that's handled by just one person within the city.
And this is to select a
This
person,
would, this
a
would be to create a,
professional.
Well, first thing to
mental
do is
health.
we would work together to create some form of bid package or qualification package to go out. And then once everything is delineated, it would go out, it would go before council, it would get approved and ratified, it would be announced, and then when that came in, you would assume that the members of that ad hoc committee would be the same ones to score it, and then a decision to be made from there moving forward. And obviously, this would be as needed based on an estimated amount that we would think would happen, and that's something else we need to look at as well.
that
And
is
it's
true,
still not-
you know.
So, and it's still not working, we're still not focused on a psychological expert to help the community. This is for us right now.
No,
Yeah,
this
no,
is strictly, this would be
for
strictly
first
for,
responders.
it'd
Yeah,
be strictly for
But
first
but the
responders.
second part of it.
Yeah, now that, I mean, you know, we're creating it through our contract. That doesn't
Right,
mean that
okay.
the city can't utilize it for,
Sir,
you know, any other department in the city, but
Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
by us doing this legwork and stuff, we're doing it for whoever the city would like to use it for, but
Okay.
it's there for the members.
For the members mainly, yeah.
Well, I would submit to you that if the city chose to move forward in that approach that you're talking about, that person might be a really good resource for triage and intake.
Right.
Or debriefing of major critical incidents and things like that. But they probably don't need to be tasked with the day-to-day care of a police officer, which would, you know, be,
Right.
but they might be that intake person that gives an officer the first call point, you know, that's HIPAA protected, if you will. They could say, hey, here's what's going on, and they could be in possession of a
Right.
list of departmental approved folks that the city has already pre-screened and the officers are deemed trustworthy. So I'm totally not against something like that. I've seen it work in cities where you actually have that victims assistance process. I mean, what someone's degree is in is.
We might, this might come up in the workshop, so it's easier.
But I've
for
seen
us,
cities that
you know.
have created, you know, mass shootings, for instance, don't happen everywhere, but when they happen, the community is in dire need of additional.
And that's something that's
sampling resources.
totally separate, so.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that
Big,
might,
big major cities do have a dedicated resource to the community, and oftentimes that dedicated resource is also used within the city's EAP program as a gatekeeper.
well, this came up from Councilwoman McCullough. I wasn't here about wanting this person to help the community. And then it morphed into what I said, kind of like doing both, which didn't, it's not gonna work.
We'll have to make sure that we don't
Yeah.
allow that more.
Well, we're
take place.
appreciative of
It's
the
totally
city's
separate.
stuff.
It's totally separate.
it's gotta
And
be.
I don't think we can allow that to morph out of control again. I think
We don't need to,
you would argue there's a need for this and more.
Yeah.
But right now, what we're talking about is specific to psychological services access from an outsourced location or person
Correct.
or company that would then allow it to be on a per use basis as needed, right? Because knock on wood, there's no need, right? Ideally, right? It would mean that but understanding the climate that we're in and the location and the residents and everything else, our call volume that we face,
Mhm.
chances are that there may be calls that would trigger that. Not to use that word, but you guys understand what I'm saying? So,
Yes.
quick question, Bob, before we convene, unless you guys have something else.
Well, I want to bring this is something that was brought to our attention by some of the younger members of the department with regards to the current language that deals with the sick leave pool. And there is a stipulation or a mandate that someone has to have 300 hours of sick leave on the book, or they can't donate to the department's sick leave pool. And there's a lot of people here that don't necessarily use any sick leave, but
What would you like to see that changed?
well, we're thinking that basically to lower that number to something that's more reasonable, maybe you want them to have 120 hours in the bank before they donate to anybody, or with the chief's permission, I would think anybody could, you know. if you got-
Only to keep it as part of your ask, if you could come up with a number. If you don't have a number in mind now, then obviously, as we've done everything else, tell us what your ask are. Ask is, we'll look for a counter and we'll go from there.
I think,
Personally, I don't think there should be really much of a number. If you have sick time, yeah, you need to keep some time for yourself, God forbid something happens to you, but like you mentioned, 120.
You know, as far as a number, I'll throw out a 150 number, a minimum of 150 hours of sick time. And what that does, that basically gives you about 4 weeks. Just about, you know, it's like, it's 10 hours short of 4 weeks.
Would you like to round it to 160 to make it 4
We
weeks?
can make it.
I'm just saying. for
Yeah,
the
no,
sake of
I
not
mean,
really
you know,
looking for it.
160 is fine. The whole idea is that the way it's set up now is, you know, we have a lot of younger officers. If you honestly look at our depth chart as far as how long officers have been here, most of the officers haven't been here long enough to have 300 hours.
Right.
All right. So when an officer does get into a position where they do need assistance from other officers, a lot of these younger officers aren't able to provide that. That can be damaging to them as far as their morale, because you can't rally behind your fellow officer because you're being held back by a number that's written right here. You know, and
To me, that's an easy administrative.
I
fix.
want to open that up and give it a little bit more wiggle room so that the officers, these younger officers, have that opportunity. You know,
So to clarify, you're asking for the sick leave pool, seeking to change from 300 hours to 160 hours.
that is correct.
I see Miss Patty's on. Miss Patty, did you make note of that as well? Maybe away from her desk. Okay. I'll make sure, and Chief will make sure that we relay that. I think now it's time for us to, you know, go back, crunch numbers. One last thing I did not get a real clear answer to because it's important for finance reasons, right? Our finance director is on the line and she would need to do this exercise is how would that look like? And are you, regardless of what the number is are you agreeable to a scaling number? Meaning if it's not 555, 444, 666, sorry, 77, whatever the number is, would you be reasonable to 456 to still get to the same numbers based on our current economic climate?
If
The number is still going to end at the
If-
same number,
you know,
but
if we need to scale, we're willing to look at a scale if that's what we need to look at.
got it.
You know, we're not trying to put you into a box and say that this is how we want it to look. Now, of course, we have a certain aspect of what we would expect it to look like, but you know, a step, if that's what we need to do, we're more than willing to look at that if that's what you want to propose.
Well, in the interest of good faith, I mean, we want to work with the city in any way we can. And if you tell us that your imminent idea about funding is such that you could only do 3% this year, you know, 4% this year or whatever, we're certainly willing to listen to that because that's what this is all about. And so we anticipate that the police market in the area is going to minimally move that 15%, but time will dictate whether or not that's the truth or not. But what I would tell you that if we just do an analysis of the contracts that are available that are in force now, we see that the biggest majority of the police is going to move 4% annually on the market for the next 3 years. Some more. I mean, I've seen a couple of contracts that are based on cost of living. They agreed to a 3% across the board, but cost of living more, the value will be adjusted by the cost of living. So you can appreciate what that means today.
Certainly.
So, yeah, it's all negotiable. That's what, you know, this contract negotiation is about, is trying to get the proper fit that, you know, that benefits efficiency in the community and the officers. So did you want us to take a short caucus and reflect on some of these things, or you want us to study this in depth?
I'd rather be studied in depth if that's possible, because I think short caucus is going to lead us to the fact that I don't want you to rush. I mean, we've given you a lot to chew on in return, and I don't think you should be rushed. Your ask hasn't changed much since the last discussion that we had. I just wanted to make sure we clarified the things that you did. You provided the backup documentation, provided what that looks like. We now need to do our homework. Wanted to make sure what you're amicable towards so we can look at that. And at the next meeting, we would try to come back with some tangible numbers of what that looks like. And that's what Chief would work on with our finance director. Just to clarify though, on our next meeting date, I want to make sure there was no confusion. What do you guys have as our next meeting date?
We don't have a next meeting scheduled because I guess that's probably my fault, and that I'm about to embark on. Our next meeting is next Wednesday, but
I think we have one scheduled for the 6th.
The next meeting I have on the calendar is for July 27th.
Yeah, that's all right.
And you're out. Right?
Yeah, I'm out of the country for 2 weeks following that, not then, but the 27th is the last.
The 27th, we are still on.
Right.
So we all agree the next meeting is July 27th
Yeah, be number 3.
Yes.
at 10 a.m. Technically, no longer number 4, technically number 3. Do we all agree and concur there?
We do.
Yes. And I would point out to you, we're not limited on the number of meetings we have. I mean, we formerly had in the rules that we had 3 meetings of which we draw the line and then there's no new subject matter, but that's really relative to any agreement.
And if I remember the ground rules correctly as well, Gus, I see that you're on. We have until the 3rd meeting to technically bring forward any additional asks.
Yeah, we're already talking about pay, so, the city can continue, as can the union, amend those asks as part of the negotiating process. But what it's not designed to prevent is at the 4th or 5th meeting, somebody to say, oh, by the way, I want to talk about this thing that nobody's brought up yet. It is really what it's there for. So, does that answer y'all's question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In relations to that, with how everything is laid out, it's pretty clear. Chief, if you could work with finance to look to see what your proposal looks like based on numbers, comparison to the ask being made, what those 2 comparisons look like, and we can bring that back. Obviously, they've already placed what the 5% looks like across the board. What does your ask look like numerically? Maybe we could use it in the same format as to what was shared there by Mr. Curran. We can have this in time for the meeting on the 27th. I think that would help us look at what that looks like. And if you are proposing, you, Susie, or in combination thereof, want to propose scaling, what does that look like? So you can have different scenarios for the team to look at, if that's fair.
Should we do this before they determine whether they like that?
Well, no, I think
That,
they're going to use what you show them to make that determination, correct?
so we're gonna come back first and tell them that it can be done or can't
Well,
be done?
no, we're going to show them, if we were to agree, here's what it would look like.
Okay,
And all the scenarios. So a comparison, if I understand this correctly, your 5%, let's just say for the sake of math, your proposal is 4% of what you proposed today, what that looks like when the numbers are tabulated. So here's what 5 looks like, 555, here's what 444 looks like, and then here's what a scale, again, I'm just saying, let's say we decided to go 5, we go 4, 5, 6, or here's what 3, 4, 5 looks like, or whatever. So that would be that comparison. Do you guys, if everybody concurs with that, though, at least we now know what our marching orders are from now until the 27th. On your side, if you could also please share that information so we can, not that we're going to do a whole lot between now and the next meeting, but share that list of psychological expert contacts that you may have that other cities may be using. So we could do that from your side, and then also chew on everything that you've been counted with today.
Yeah, I can email that to the chief here in about 10 minutes.
Okay, and then are there any questions about any of the asks that either side is making?
I have a question in reference to the recalculation of vacation, sick, and comp time. So the way that I read this, chief, it says that now it specifically says sick leave.
yes.
Yeah, as far as the calculation, is that the only thing that you're
I think
talking about recalculating, or are we talking about?
I think it'd be everything because
All right, I don't know that we can legally recalculate comp time. It's federally protected as far as time and a half, and I don't believe that we can recalculate
Yeah.
that at all.
in vacation, in the.
Well, from a standpoint of unfunded liability, I think the city can reevaluate its position and decide to purchase people out of their comp time on today's dollars instead of
We
later
haven't-
on, but I don't think you can just arbitrarily decide that it doesn't exist anymore.
So that can go for vacation also probably. 'Cause the cash out then would be, it hurts the city, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
I understand, but
I would say we want to look at the numbers and we may be able to provide the chief with some insight about the opinions of the officers with regards to recalculation. Because, well, obviously, if you're an employee with less than 5 years of service, you're talking about sick leave stuff. I mean, it's a state mandate to pay them $720 upon separation. But that is negotiable in the school of collective bargaining. So, you know, there may be some efficiencies that can be done. And I'm assuming we're talking about the unfunded liability of having to pay someone a massive amount of walkaway because they've chosen to leave. And so, in my mind, it's all negotiable. But it's got to be within the context of what the membership can vote to agree to. So if there is no consensus on the part of the membership to any kind of recalculation, we can't represent that they will pass a contract that will have that in it. But if there's room for working, that's something we can discuss with the chief. You know, with you know, obviously at the table, but I'm talking about it as a sidebar. He's trying to find every efficiency. My assumption is within the budget to help you fund the future.
That's the whole deal. To get that package, we're trying to reduce everything we can, make a trade-off. So Conan, you're gonna send me
I'm gonna send you an email.
what,
with
everything you're,
the 3 names of the psychologists that have been recommended,
and other stuff you're gonna send me too, right? The percentages and so forth,
percentages
that
of,
we talked about here. You want 444, right? Or 456 or,
Well,
No, they're asking it's 555.
okay.
It's up to us to look at what their scenarios look like. In
you're
that
gonna,
case.
yeah. I'm
If their
assuming
current
you're looking at
ask,
fundability.
right, you're gonna have to sit with Susie and look at their ask
Right.
as well as what does your counter looks like? Is your counter more? Is it less? Is it equivalent to? And then how are you proposing that? Straight across the board, show that, and then also show if you do decide to scale it, what the scaling looks like, which is I believe what you said you would consider, depending on how it looks.
yes.
Okay.
Well, I want to make sure that there's a meeting in the minds here about what the chief has just laid on the table, and that is using Texas City as a model and revamping your pay plan to accomplish there. And then is also part of their pay plan, they've got 4% salary increases within their contract. So, you know, if that's, you know, the end result may be 555. You understand what I'm saying? If to reevaluate our current pay plan and bring it to the level Texas City represents 2%, and then there's 4% each year, that's cost to the city, and we understand that. So that's what we're trying to make sure that we're.
I don't, and to address that, I don't know that we'll be able to match it because I haven't looked at it in depth enough to know. But now taking my moderator off and putting the city management hat
But
on.
that's what was laid on the table.
I
here
could
is
tell you
a
that-
possible scenario to resolve the hiring and retention issue of the department. And whether or not that's going to be your last final offer, I can't tell you. I'm just
I can
saying
tell you that we're gonna scrap like
we're
heck to try to
intrigued
get
to
there.
study that approach because but it also facilitates the absence of certain types of auxiliary pays that have been paid in order to try to finance that notion too. So it's kind of coming out of our hide, if you will.
If it's possible, Chief, too, and I don't mean to add to the timetable, but so that there's time for review prior to the meeting on the 27th. We could try to get that to them by closing business on Monday, the 25th. So you at least have a day to chew on that if it's possible. If that's fair. Again, attempt. I know that that's hard with what we're going through right now through budget season, but we could try to do that.
We would appreciate that if it's possible.
It'll save
Yeah.
time from having another meeting, right? So
Yeah, I realize that it may not be, but you know, if possible, yes, that would benefit us well.
I think for the sake of everybody here, I think we've had a very productive meeting. I think we've gotten closer to where we need to be. Does anybody have any questions or closing remarks? No, you guys feel like we've made some progress here?
Yeah, I felt like we made some good progress here.
Very good, fair enough. Mr.
Yes,
Kerr?
sir.
For all those listening, anybody on Zoom that would like to make any comments for the good of the group? Questions, comments, closing remarks?
We're good. Good here.
Everybody's good. Miss Susie, you're good. Assuming she's probably not another call.
I'm good.
Excellent. Great. Kyle, thank you for the IT services. Chief, you got anything?
No, that's it. Sir.
All right, we will close this meeting, reconvening at 10 a.m. on July 27th with the hopes of getting you the information by close of business the 25th. Everybody knows what we got to get to each other. We can move from there. Fair enough?
Good deal.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.